World Wide Web. So the last time we have seen that in the application layer is where the applications are running. That will be any applications that need to use the network. The last time we gave a few examples of applications that need to use the network. A bunch of examples came from your cell phones. So all the pretty much 90% of applications on the cell phones, such as browsers, GPS, text messages. We have also seen email, how the email application works, how it's delivered through the mail servers, and what protocol it uses to communicate between the client and the server. We have also seen the domain name system, which is sitting in this layer, and another application that allowed us to map IP addresses to domain names, such as www.google.com or another name. Another application that is in the application layer is the World Wide Web. So we will spend some time today talking about World Wide Web. The formal definition of World Wide Web is an architectural framework for accessing linked documents. Spread over multiple computers. So the idea about the World Wide Web started back in 1945 when a scientist named Vannevar Bush came up with the idea that we should probably organize documents similar to the way we think. In other words, the way the human mind functions is not in sequential order, kind of like we write code. So we first run the first line, then the second line, then the third line. Or when we read text and start from the top and read the first line, the second line, and third line. But our mind doesn't really function like that. So when we think about some idea or thought, then our mind jumps to another thought that's linked to the first one. And then from the second thought, our mind might jump to a third thought that was linked to the previous one. So he got the idea of linking documents in this way back in 1945. And so this idea was later implemented. In 1965, a scientist named Ted Nelson coined the term hypertext. So hypertext allowed us to implement these links from one document to another. In 1965, we had also other inventions, such as the mouse, but the first initial proposal for a web of linked documents came in 1989 from the European Center for Nuclear Research, called CERN for short. So a physicist named Tim Berners-Lee gave a proposal for information management. So, and this system that he proposed allowed scientists, in that case physicists studying physics, to link their scientific documents together. So that's how the web started. So in 1990, Tim Berners-Lee wrote, "This proposal concerns management of general information about accelerators and experiments in the Center for European Research, in the European Center for Nuclear Research." And so it discusses problems of loss of information about complex evolving systems, and the solution is based on distributed hypertext system. So in 1991, the first browser was created. So the first text-based browser. So there was no pictures or videos or any other media. It was just text-based. And so eventually a graphical interface was created for it several years later. And so that's the first browser that we had. It was called Mosaic. Mosaic was so popular that a year later, Netscape created a new browser and started a new company which made a lot of money based on these browsers. Finally, this Center for European Center for Nuclear Research and MIT here in the United States signed up an agreement called the World Wide Web Consortium, so that the MIT will run the United States part of the web. And the European part was run by a French research center. And so today, the formal website is W3 for the World Wide Web. W3.org. This is where the formal specifications of the web are. So initially, just several universities had shared documents through that web, and later on, after Netscape and from 95 to 2000, there was an internet boom and .com era, so a lot of commercial companies started using that for conducting their business through the web. So companies like AOL, Yahoo, Netscape, Google, and VeriSign and others started conducting business through the web. If we think about the architecture of the web, it's essentially a client-server structure. So we do have a client, which is the browser, that is requesting a page from a web server. The web server is a designated machine which is sitting there always running and always available and waiting for requests from the client to come in. And so the client will send the request to the web server following specific protocol, which is the hypertext transfer protocol. So this hypertext transfer protocol contains this set of rules of how the communication should proceed between the web client and the web server. So it defines the commands which the client can use in order to request pages from the server, and it defines the responses which the server can send back to the client. Now, when the client receives the response consists of HTML code or another code that depending on what language was used to write the web page, it's usually a web page, so it gets HTML code, and so the purpose of the client, in this case the web browser, is to read and parse through HTML code and display the page properly formatted on the screen. The HTML is hypertext markup language. It's a markup language, which means it just provides information about the formatting. Let's say here we'll have a link, here we have bold text, here we have italic, here we have different colors, and the pictures in the top left corner. That's what a markup language is. So then the browser is supposed to understand this language and parse through the code and determine where this picture should be displayed exactly, to the left or to the right, or how big it's supposed to be, and then all the colors and the fonts that it needs to display. Yes.
So if HTML does those things, what does CSS do?
Okay, so there are many other languages that can be used to create web pages. One of them is cascading style sheets, like he's asking. So it allows for different styles to be specified. There are typically, most of the pages are HTML, but there are of course other pages that can be written in other languages that would, for example, run either on the client side or on the server side, depending whether they're static or dynamic pages. In the simplest case, the pages are static, and they are just a file. It could be HTML file, or it could be a file like a JPEG or a Word document or a MP3 file. It could be some file that the client requested from the server. So the server will look up in its hard drive and see if it has such a file. And if it does, it will send it back to the client. So that's pretty much the very basic functionality of the web client and server. Now, there could be more advanced functionality, like what he's asking, or it could be even that when the page is requested, some server-side code is started and some processing is done on the server before the response is sent to the client. So we will look at this in a detail in a moment.